Adesso Erich Kirchler, ti ostini a parlare in inglese? No. Yes, va bene, vabbè, non c'è modo, non c'è verso. Erich Kirchler è, al di là del nome, è un italiano, poi lavora a Vienna. No, c'è già la tua. Ah, cambia tutto. Ok, ha lavorato con noi, è stato a Bologna, ha insegnato anche a Cesena, alla loro facoltà di psicologia, ha fatto parte anche lui della Summer School che è stata qui ricordata. Adesso vabbè, non pratica più molto l'italiano, per cui si sente più tranquillo nel parlare in inglese. Però non so, dopo ti penalizzeremo in un qualche modo. Vabbè, adesso dai.
Grazie. Bruna, grazie. Buon pomeriggio. No, I said I would like to speak in English. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a really great honor to be here, and it's a pleasure to memorize the events, the experiences which I had here in Bologna. Well, I said I would like to speak in English, so at least I myself think I have the chance to understand what I'm going to say. Yeah? All right. I know the afternoon should be on interventions, but as an academic, I have never been working really outside the academia. Nevertheless, social psychology, from my perspective, has a lot to say, and I try to say a lot to the ministries of finance, not all over the world, but in different countries. I thought, however, that talking about tax psychology is not really appropriate. So that's why I chose to recognize, to remember what we were doing when we were working together here with Augusto. So the title of my speech is Looking Back at the Bologna Experience with Augusto, and especially also with his team, so to say, the extended family, as I heard this afternoon. When did I meet Augusto first time? I think it was at the 23rd International Congress of Psychology, that time in Mexico. I remember some people I met from Bologna at that time. I was a student at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, going to Mexico to talk about our studies on everyday life experience during unemployment. At that time, I didn't have a job at the university, which was permanent, so unemployment was really a big issue for me. And I think Augusto was not so much interested in unemployment, but what I told him was that we use a method which I think he found interesting. It's the diary method at that time. So all the studies which we conducted in this period were longitudinal studies with this instrument, which is not very economic, but it yields a lot of data which tell you about people's experiences, not over a day, but over a whole period of days. So that was kind of something which he found interesting. I found it interesting to meet the people from Bologna, and I asked him whether I could attend the 1986 summer school. And he said, of course you can, but not as a student, which I wanted. But he told me that I could help the students, the attendees, with their statistical questions, with their statistical projects. And I still remember the time, the battle actually, which I fought with Sinead, and I very often lost at that time. Okay, from that moment on, I was invited regularly to come to Bologna. So there were regular annual visits. Teaching statistics was actually my job here. And I must say I learned a lot about statistics during that time, especially when I had to teach those 400 students in Cesena. Then we conducted a lot of research during this period. Of course, research which focused on all the topics which Augusto were most interested, but not only on those topics. I will mention a few issues, a few topics which I were studying with the extended family, as I said before. From 1992 on, I came to Bologna for several years, and then I had to stop because I moved from the University of Linz then to the University of Vienna, and the University of Vienna is indeed a maze, it's a labyrinth which is still a jungle for me, and I was really not able to, well, spend more time abroad, which I wanted to do. Okay, a lot has been said that Augusto was interested in groups, in the dynamics of groups of young people, of adolescents. That's true, and we were studying together adolescent groups, but he was also interested in forming groups and interested in creating an identity within these groups and dynamics which were, well, both serving personal growth but also research output. The family, the group which I remember is this one, with Augusto in the middle. I was very much interested in staying in this network, in this group, with Bruna, Luisa Bombeni. You see a lot of names of people who are here. And with all these people, I had the opportunity, the occasion to collaborate during the Bologna years and the years afterwards as well. When I was thinking about what we have done almost a quarter of a century ago, I really had to go back to the publications which we had during that time, and there are quite a few. Look at that. These are all the publications. Of course, you're not able to read all that, but I thought, well, it's a lot what we have done and what Augusto has initiated at that time. So we have to really thank him for the possibilities, for the initiatives, for his, well, ideas to study adolescents, but not only adolescent groups. So what is that about? I thought, well, I cannot go back and read all these articles to remember what we have done. I was doing a check of the titles, of the words in the titles. And you see here, the most frequent words are, of course, methods, studying, surveys, longitudinal, science, questionnaires, and so on. Well, that's not very interesting. It's the tools which we use. But predominantly, we were studying adolescents, peers, peer groups, difficulties, problems, solving problems, but also relationships. Marcella already remembered us that we have been studying drug addiction. So that was quite important, developmental aspects, developmental issues, and the transition from young age to adulthood. So adolescence is the most prominent word actually here describing what we have done during that time. I was then looking at the people we have been working together, and you see here, these are all the Bologna people. Massimo Martini, is he considered Bolognese? No, but I met him here, of course. And we were studying, well, as I already said, different issues. With Augusto, and especially Luisa and Marcella, and also Sandro Costarelli was in this group, we were predominantly studying adolescent groups. So one of the titles of our publications was Sweet 16, and adolescents, the evolution of the self, peer groups, status, and identification. That was what we were most interested. And I remember quite well, the idea was to study especially the impact which informal groups have on adolescents' life, and adolescents' maturation, actually. Because the question at that time was whether young people should meet informal groups or not, whether they would help to, go smoothly, to transfer smoothly into adulthood or not, whether delinquency would actually increase, or the likelihood of criminal behavior would increase if people meet frequently these informal groups. Another question which we were dealing with was whether these groups, these informal groups, are in competition with the family, with the adolescent's family. So you either meet the group or the family, and if you meet the group, you would not listen to what your parents are telling you. So quite a few studies on that, but we were also looking at drug addiction, so this misbehavior, but Marcella, you have already told us a little bit, so I skip all this part. Well, The idea of this afternoon is to think about the interventions of social psychology in different institutions. Since I don't have to, well, to contribute much on that, I thought, well, let's see what the impact in the academia was with all the papers which we have written here. And I'm really proud to say that Google Scholar yielded more than 500 citations of the work. So I think that in the academia we were heard at least a little bit in this field. There was an impact, which I think was important. Now, what have we learned at that time from the research which we have conducted in the field of adolescence? I think we have learned that most adolescents belong to informal peer groups, and it's not a danger. Not necessarily it's dangerous to belong to these informal groups. The rules created by informal groups are related to the values and the social-cultural system to which the groups refer. So the values, the norms in these groups are quite important. And the stronger the group cohesion is, and the stronger individuals identify with a peer group, the more important it is to stick with these rules, with these group values or group norms. Peer groups are fragile social systems in which adolescents feel personally implicated in daily interactions. So they are important, but they are also fragile instruments. We learned a lot about adolescents and their groups from Wim Meus this morning, also Monica Rubini and Giuseppe Speltini were talking about the experiences of these groups, but we were mostly interested in seeing how the group, how belonging to those groups relates to solving problems which adolescents have and how they would resolve the problems by talking, interacting with their peers. To be very brief, I think we found that if adolescents encounter difficulties related to school, work, to their future, then they go to their families to get advice. These are issues, these are topics which you discuss with your family. But if difficulties relate to interpersonal or to intimate relations, the family is no longer giving the advice which you are taking. You go to your peer group. The informal group helps you to get advice to solve these kind of problems or questions which you might have. Strong integration in informal peer groups is not in opposition to strong positive relations with the family. If I remember well, I think what we found was that there is a quite strong positive correlation between identification or belongingness to one's group and belongingness to the family. So both are important and not in competition with each other. Peer groups help adolescents to enhance their self-esteem and elaborate positive representations of their self. I think we have heard a lot about that during the whole afternoon. That's important. What I learned at that time from Augusto and what impressed me especially was a lot was mentioned already, but what I learned is, and what I think he did, and has not been mentioned this afternoon, was that educational psychology, developmental psychology, and social psychology go well together. So in this case, he was quite interdisciplinary in his discipline, psychology. I thought that's something which was new, also on the European level actually. All right, I said I would like to say something also about the extended family, because I think meeting Augusto was not just working with Augusto, but Augusto gave you the opportunity. He was, well, able to stimulate you to work with other people on topics which are not related to the many topics which we have heard today, this morning, and this afternoon. Bruna, do you remember? Do you remember hooliganism? Yes. We were studying, at that time in Bologna, it was a problem with hooliganism, and we were wandering by Napoli. See, Bologna, Napoli. And the fans from Napoli were quite behaving but not the Bolognese. And we were wondering why that could be the case. And what we found was that Bologna was not doing very well at that time, while Napoli was always first or second at least. And therefore we thought that if the fans, no apologies. But what we thought might be a fundamental driver of hooliganism was that if you don't have fun with the squadra, you make your own fun. So that was one of the outcomes. And we, at that time, and it's quite long ago, we were asking what happens with the North African immigrants. And I don't know whether the title which we chose at that time would be still considered as politically correct. We had in the title, "Why Don't They Stay at Home?" Yeah. But we did also some in-group, out-group studies, which I found especially interesting in Alto Adige and Sudtirolo, where you have a German majority with an Italian minority in a country with the Italian majority. So that is kind of a cipolla situation, which we were studying. With Salvatore Zappalà, we were entering a little bit my field of research, which is economic psychology. We were studying how clients of banks are committed to stay with the banks or not. But then, with Chiara Berti and several other people, we were studying especially, well, that was too quick, relationships, intimate relationships at that time. And I remember we had very nice ideas, spectacular ideas after having had some glasses of wine. We were looking at influence tactics in close relationships, and especially something which is still keeping me busy, justice issues here in Bologna, and taxes. Sometimes I was able to convince you that taxes is an interesting field. Even for psychologists. Yes, I don't even need 2 minutes, because this is the last slide to show you. The studies with Marcella and Giussi. We were looking at social representations, drug addiction, and so on. But I remember one study which I considered quite funny. It was on social representations about animals. And we were distinguishing between people who are having pets at home and no pets. Remember, what we found was that the associative process is very similar in both groups. If you have a pet at home and you don't have one, you always start with emotions in the associative process. You then move into knowledge issues, cognition, and you finish with behavioral contents. And I found it quite interesting that those who have a pet at home told us that they are talking to the animals talk to them. They were anthropomorphizing their animals. Whereas for those without pets, the animal finished on the plate. Thank you.
Grazie mille, un altro pezzo di storia.